If we want to be a professional, it is good practice to design a standard request form that is appropriate for our organization. What is a standard request form? It is a form often called a request for quotation, RFQ for short, or a request for proposal. What should the RFQ contain? Simply speaking, the RFQ should contain all the data to enable the supplier to prepare an appropriate quotation, including any questions allowing for assessment of the supplier and its capabilities, as well as the basic data to determine the boundary points for future negotiations. Let's take two assumptions into consideration. Firstly, we have a range of qualified suppliers to which we will send our RFQ. Secondly, we have already carried out a detailed analysis of our needs, and we have data drawn from the technical, qualitative, and commercial aspects of this deficit. So, in other words, we know what we need. Let's try to design an RFQ form for the most complicated situation in theory. In our case, the RFQ will relate to orders for mechanical components from which we will assemble our state-of-the-art laptop model. Why the most complicated one? This stems from the fact that, in addition to fulfilling the request to supply sophisticated quality components, which we will order in quantities of 2 million pieces per year, each part also requires investment in tools such as injection molds. This also demands applying special packaging standards. Furthermore, and above all, with the aforementioned order quantities, both of us want to assure the lowest possible TCO. In other words, total cost of ownership, the best price for each of us. Firstly, if we actually require precise data, let's prepare instructions for suppliers on how to complete the RFQ. This will save time for additional explanations and provide a better understanding of our expectations. Let's separate the sections in our RFQ. These are our suggestions. Section 1. Organizational data. In addition to basic data such as the supplier, the date of submission of the request for quotation, we should also include all data enabling technical identification, such as technical drawing number and its edition, version, and specification. Another very important data point for the supplier is the annual forecast of purchases. In other words, volumes, project duration, in other words, how many production prospects it has, and what the frequency of deliveries will be. With regard to the price we are asking for, it is also extremely important to spell out the delivery terms and conditions, and the packaging characteristics. Delivery conditions are specified in Incoterms and outline as, for example, DDP, EXW, FOB, etc. What do they stand for? DDP. Here, the greatest responsibility and costs, including the payment of duties, are borne by the seller. The buyer assumes the risk only when the load is delivered to the designated place. EXW. The delivery is made at the time the goods are made available at the designated place. The buyer is responsible for import, export, and transit issues. So the supplier has little responsibility and incurs low costs associated with the delivery of goods. FOB. From the moment the goods cross the transit carrier's side, all costs, risks, and issues related to possible insurance are passed to the buyer. Is this crucial in terms of price? Of course, yes. Let's imagine that we are looking for a supplier who will deliver plastic moldings to our plant in Geneva, Switzerland, and we found a supplier meeting all our criteria in Bordeaux, France. We will order batches every 10 days in the number of 10,000 pieces. The route from Bordeaux to Geneva is 700 kilometers long and costs our supplier €2,800. In other words, the supplier will add 28 euro cents to each molding on account of the transport. Therefore, it is important to define the delivery conditions as DDP. Then the supplier delivers the goods to Geneva and calculates the cost of transport, or EXW. In this case, we collect the goods and handle the transport issues. It is possible that for the above-mentioned products, the production of which is not very demanding, we will look for and qualify a local supplier to avoid 28% of additional transport costs. So, what will we introduce to the further section of the RFQ form? Most often, there are quality requirements, which also strongly determine costs. If we have specific requirements as to the conditions for acceptance of initial samples, material certificates, and tests that we want the supplier to carry out, now is the time to state all these issues. If we require specific audits of the process and the conditions for its acceptance, it is also important to describe these requirements in this section. If we have quality objectives in place that we expect from the supplier and we have established rules for handling complaints, for example, a maximum number of days for response, the supplier should know about these requirements. Remember that we should present our requirements in a clear and fair manner. Quality costs money. That is fact, and we expect it. This will be reflected in our expenses. And it is much fairer and more professional to talk about this at the stage of completing a request for quotation than in a situation where we expect high quality once production starts. Imagine that we deliver 20,000 fasteners or simply screws to a car manufacturer every week. In fact, at first glance, it would seem to be only a return of €12,000 with a margin of 6%, which is not a very profitable business. However, the function of these screws is to hold together the cooling module. Suddenly, one batch was not properly hardened, and so it was delivered in such a condition to the manufacturer. During the assembly of the cooling module, the screws break off and the module falls apart. After 3 attempts, the manufacturer stops production, lodges a complaint, and introduces the so-called CSL2. That is Controlled Shipment Level 2, in which, until defects in our process are removed, external inspectors check 100% of produced parts at our cost. How much could this cost? These are astronomical sums of money that range from several tens of thousands of euros to as much as several million, assuming that the customer's production is stopped. So, does quality cost? Yes. The cost here is both in the lack of quality and the assurance of quality. So, let's remember to define our requirements at the stage of completing the RFQ form so that we have full rights to enforce it further. And here is the third section. Only for the brave. A cost breakdown that is an open purchasing card. This is an effective tool, but very often suppliers get heart palpitations on seeing the request. Why? This stems from the fact that they have to indicate their costs, whether in terms of materials, products, or components, as well as process costs, including time. These are also packaging costs, logistics, and supplier's margin. So everything is transparent here. However, the problem is that as a customer, we often do not use this tool optimally. Why? Because we believe that although we can't influence the price by margin negotiations so much, we see an opportunity, however, in the verification of process times declared by the supplier. In practice, the declared often differs from the real, and these can still often be optimized and influenced by the price without hard negotiations. You can learn more about cost breakdown in the lesson under this title. What sections can we define? Everything depends on our needs. We can introduce a feasibility study section in which the supplier can suggest modifications or improvements by engaging as a professional in designing our product. An example of a feasibility study form is visible in the presentation. As you can see, the supplier may suggest certain modifications or improvements, thus contributing to the improvement of quality of our processes. It is also a good practice to draw up all appendices to agreements and to describe the commercial terms and conditions that will be binding for the supplier during our cooperation. All agreements should be made in writing.